let's get started here. So, intro to R, basically for those that don't know what R is exactly, it's one of the most popular programming languages that is used for data scientists, especially if you're going into the academic field or looking to do research. You're going to see a lot of people using R to do their research, and that was essentially what the point of R was made to do. It was made by statisticians to perform a bunch of different statistical methods and doing analysis of large data sets and other things like that. So that's essentially what like the programming language itself is, but I'm also going to be covering RStudio as well. And if people aren't aware what that is, it's an IDE, which basically means it's like built on top of R, and it gives additional functionality that like the base R doesn't actually provide itself. So if we go to the next slide, we can see on the left here, this is what R on its own looks like. It's just a console where you can type basic functions. It doesn't have that much to offer. It doesn't have like much of an interface beyond this, but on the right here is what RStudio looks like. And you can see there's a lot more different things, and I'll go over all of them shortly, but we have like 4 different panels here with all a bunch of extra functionality that you can't get with just R. So you'll see a lot, like I would say like 95%, if not more, of people who use R end up using RStudio just because it's that much better. But before we actually get started covering R, here are some links to actually be able to download them. This slideshow will be posted within like a day or two of this meeting. Yeah, these will be really helpful to actually download them and use each of them. So the first link is I post in chat is for R, and then the second one is RStudio. And just make sure when you're downloading both of these, make sure to download R before you do download RStudio, or else I haven't tried it myself, but I assume it wouldn't work just because you need R to use RStudio. So again, just download R here, click one of these links, Windows, Mac, or Linux, whatever you use. And then RStudio, you can click this link to download here. But moving on to actually using RStudio, this is essentially what you're going to be looking at when you open up RStudio for the first time. It's going to be split into 4 different panels here, and I'll just go over briefly what each of them do, and I'll make sure to explain them more as we continue with the actual file that I have prepared for us. But the first one is the source panel, and this is where you're basically going to be typing up all of your code. It's just easier to read through it, all of it. And you can save a bunch of files at the top. If you see, I have a bunch of different files. So you can have multiple up at once if you want to switch in between them. But this is probably the one you're going to be looking and working with the most. And then this blue one, the console panel, this is probably the second most important one. This is where all of your functions are actually going to be ran. And this is where you're just going to get all of the outputs for all of the functions you actually run. So if you look at this image here, like all of this blue text here is basically functions that I ran. And then all of the black text is outputs I get from each of the functions. And then the red text is just any errors you might like get. So just knowing all of this is just helpful in knowing what you're actually reading, because when you're first reading it, it might be a little bit complicated. But then moving on to the top right, this one is the environment panel. And basically what this does is it essentially lists all of the different variables that you have currently saved, like in your current R session. So it just gives you some simple information. So like this is a data frame. I'll cover what that is exactly in a little bit, but it just shows it has 778 rows and then 6 columns. So it just gives some nice little bit information here. And then the last panel would be the plot/package panel. Right now you can see it shows a plot, and basically this is just the last plot that I ran in the console. And it's just a simple way to display it and to easily view it, but it has a few other uses. At the top, you see plots, packages, and I'll explain all of that in just a bit here. But with that, I think we're ready to get started with the actual R file. So if I pull that up here, just like I said, this is a basic look at what you'll be working with here. And we'll get started with the top left here again, like I said. So I have a file pulled up here, but usually when you're first opening up for the first time, you'll just see something like a basic blank page like this. And if you already have a file saved and you want to pull it up, you can simply just do file and then open file, and then you can see intro to the R, and then yeah, it opens up here. So just as simple as that. But let's get actually started with the functions. So if people don't have any experience programming at all, like this is the first language you've ever used, it might take some time getting used to. I would definitely recommend downloading R in RStudio after this and practicing with it. But uh, one of the basic functions you can do in a programming language is like just simple arithmetic operations. Like right here, you can do 1 + 1, and if you click run, you can see an output here of 2, and it just you can do a bunch of different stuff like that very, very quickly and easily. Obviously, you can do like a bunch of different commands, like 48 divided by 78, 28 divided by 4. And yeah, so yeah, that's the most simple operation you could do, but there's a lot more that comes with R, and yeah, I'll show you that next. So if you want to assign a variable, for example, let's say I have the variable X here, I can assign the value 50 to it. And if I actually want to see the variable, I can type X in the console. And then you can see this variable is saved at 50. And just like I mentioned before, we have the environments panel here. You can see the value of X is 50. And then another nice functionality of R is you can actually change what data type the variable is after you first assign it. Like some languages like Java, you're not able to do that. But you can see here when I run this function and then type X in chat, you can see you get hello world here. So yeah, that's just another simple, nice trick about R that some other programming languages don't have. But yeah, there's a lot more in depth you can go with programming languages like loops and lists and other things. I won't be covering that here because it's not as important. It's definitely important if you want to like learn how to properly use R, but for the Datathon itself, it's not that essential. So we'll be covering it, or I won't be covering that exactly. Does this need a Windows machine or can work on MacBook? Yes, this can work on MacBook. I don't have one myself. I don't have experience with it, but you are still able to download RStudio and R with it. And it is, I'm pretty sure it looks like exactly the same. So I think you would be fine if you're using a Mac. So, okay, so moving on to the next part. So another thing that's kind of important to know about R is that to access files like CSV files, if you want to read that in, you need to make sure you're in the same directory as that file. So right now, this getwd command allows you to check which file you're in. So I'm right now in the intro to R file in my documents, and that's exactly where I want. That's where I can see my current files. But if you're not in the correct file, you can use the setwd command, followed by the directory to actually get access to exactly where you want it. So yeah, with that, that's just an important thing. Every time you restart a session, you might need to update that. But yeah, be aware that if you're trying to access a file that's not in the right directory, then you won't be able to without changing it. So moving on to the main focus of this workshop is actually working with data sets. So I have one here. Let me just pull it up on Google here. This is on Kaggle. And if people aren't aware, Kaggle is like a very, very important website when you're starting to get into data science. It has a bunch of different data sets you can work with. And then they also have competitions where you can try building like the best models and stuff. So highly recommend this website if people have not used it. But yes, for that, the data set I'm using is the world population growth data set. So it has a few columns here, like essentially this data set shows the population from 2022 and then how it changed to 2023 for different cities across the world. So we'll be covering that shortly. But if you want to actually download the data set to use, just click this download button here, and then it'll save as like a zip folder, and then uh, it should be in like download somewhere. And then you just need to extract this folder, and then you'll be able to access this CSV here, which is what we'll be using. So once you have that CSV up and prepared, you'll need to actually read it in to your R session. So to do that here, you use the read.csv command. And what that does is essentially it takes the information from the CSV and puts it into a data frame, which is essentially just like a data type that lets you just be able to access all of the information. And we'll go through it in a second. So once I read that there, to see if it actually works, you type in the variable name. So that would be df here, which stands for data frame, of course. So when I tried to run it, you can see it has like a lot of columns. So you obviously can't read all of this at once. It's just way too much. So you can use a function like head here, which just lets you read the first couple of like columns. So it's 6 here by default. Yeah, so head just essentially allows you to easily read the first couple rows of the data frame. And if you want to change how many you want to read from like 6 to some other variable, you can just do like head df comma 10, and then now it shows the first 10 columns. So it's just a really useful tool to just see the first couple of rows. And then this next function here, names df, it just gives you a list of all of the different columns in the actual data frame. So you can see population in 2023, 22, city name, country, all of that. So it's just really useful so you understand what exactly is inside of the data frame and how you can manipulate it at later points here. And then this next function, dim, it gives you the dimensions of the actual data frame. So 78 by 6, like I mentioned those numbers earlier. It essentially means 778 rows and then 6 columns that you're working with here. Just being able to understand how big of a data frame you're working with is really important, because if you're having a massive data frame, it might take a long time to run some functions. So being able to understand that beforehand is really essential. So looking at the actual columns itself, like I showed earlier, the head function, it shows you all of them. But if you want to look at only a specific column, then you can use this $sign here followed by the name of the actual column just to see that specific column. So you can see here we have like a massive, like every single value for the actual growth rate. And if you want to do like only see the first couple for that specific row, you can do head as well. So yeah, it shows like the first 6 values for the population growth rate column. And then moving on, we have the plotting of these actual graphs. Obviously, with the Datathon, plotting is a very important part of R, and this is just a simple function that shows the different types of plots you can do, the plot function. So when I run that here, you can see this new updated plot here shows the growth rate on the x-axis and then the actual total population here. So you can, on the data set, like extract certain information based on these types of graphs. And then moving on to this next function, this would be a subset. And what this function essentially does is it filters down the data frame to specific values. Because often you don't want to look at the whole data frame, you only want to look at certain values within this data frame. So if we run that here, what this function does is it looks at only the cities with a growth rate of above 0.05 or 5%. So if you look here, it's a lot of like countries in Africa and Asia, so you might be able to get some extra insights from that. And then if you wanna use this subset to do additional like plots and stuff, then you could take the subset and make it its own variables. So like here example, I'm taking the subset of the data frame where type equals US. So this means like cities that are in the US specifically, and then I'm setting it to a variable called df underscore US underscore cities. And once I do that, I can, if I want to take a look at it, you can see here's like a couple different cities. And then you can combine that with the plot function earlier to plot the population in 2023 and then its growth rate. Okay, so continuing on, let's say that you like changed up the data a little bit, like here I just filtered the US cities down to something smaller, and once that's done, you can write it to essentially a new CSV file, which you can use, you can share it to someone else, and then they can work with it later if you use the write.csv function here. So when I run that here, you won't see any changes, of course, but if you look here, there's the files section here, and you can see that we have a new CSV file here called US cities population. So that's just one way to write CSV files after we're done. It looks like I got a message in the chat asking about, could you please explain what exactly DF does and how do you start using it? Okay, yeah, I can cover that again. I did rush through it a little bit quickly, but DF stands for data frame. And essentially what a data frame is, it stores a bunch of columns and rows of information that you have. So what I did was I read in this CSV file, world country populations, into this data frame here, and it allowed me to essentially use this to manipulate the data. So let me just run that function again. And when I run df, you can see it shows just a list of like the columns population, city, country. And this is essentially the same exact information that was in that CSV that I downloaded earlier, just put into a data frame for you to actually use in R itself. So basically df is a variable which reads through the link, which has a data noted in it. Essentially, yes, that is what a data frame used. And can we read make df read any size and type of file? So for it can read like really large files. I don't know the exact limits of it, but at least for the Datathon, the like Starbucks CSV file, it should be able to read just fine. It can handle like tens of thousands of data, so it shouldn't be that much of an issue. But as for reading other files, there are different files you can read. Like you can read Excel sheets as well. I think with like the function read.xlsx or something like that. You'd have to look up exactly, but at least for the point of the Datathon, it's going to be primarily just the CSV that we'll be using. So you shouldn't have to worry about like files that are too large or have a different like format. But I think that's all the questions for now. So let's get continuing off to where we were. So yeah, I showed how, like, again, once you're done manipulating data frame and you want to like rewrite it to a new file, you can use the write.csv command here. And you can see here that when I ran that, it gave us this new US cities population CSV. And if I view that file, you can see here, it has all of the cities that are in the US. So the last very important thing that you'll need to know when using R is packages. So how the base of R works is it has already a bunch of functions built into it that you're able to explore and use. Like I was just showing you, there's head, names, dimension, plots, subset. All of these functions are built into R on its own. But then if you want to use more complex functions or other functions, then there are things known as packages, which essentially are like made by other users. And it's just a list of new functions that are added to your R session, which you can use. So I'll show here an example. Actually, but before we go to the next example, if you want to see all of the packages you currently have installed, you can look at this bottom right panel, and this essentially is a list of every single package you can use and like a brief description of it. So this is just one way so you know what packages you already have. And then if you want to add a package that you don't have right now, there's two ways to do it. So the one way you can do it is using this install button here. And then it pulls up this box here, and then you can type whatever package you want here. So the example I'm using is Tidyverse here. And when you pull that up here, you can click install, just click yes, and then yeah, it looks like it's going to restart the session, but it essentially installs all of this. It might take a minute or two if you don't have it yet, because when you first get R, it doesn't come with it. I already have it, so it downloaded pretty quickly. So that's one way to install new packages. And then another way is to use this install.packages function. And this is typically the way that most people do it, because if you're sharing, for example, a R file to someone and they haven't used it before, they might not have some of the packages that you do already. So it's better if you just type this out here and then run it. It just installs it for them here, so they don't have to have the hassle of trying to figure out how to get it themselves. But yeah, once you install a package for this first time, you don't have to install anymore. You already have it for the version of R you're using. But to actually get the package up and running, every single new session, you're going to need to load in this package to your actual session. And to do that, you need to use this library function here. So like I said, I downloaded the Tidyverse package here. So if I actually want to use the Tidyverse package, I need to do library Tidyverse here. And then you'll get a bunch of messages in here, and then yeah, it'll be up and running at that point. But what Tidyverse is it isn't actually one package itself, it's a collection of packages. And these packages are actually really important if you want to work with R, especially if you want to use it as a tool for data science. It has a bunch of different functions that allow you to better manipulate data, analyze data, and then also do even more cool visualizations as well on top of that. Can we read a PDF file like the Starbucks one in DF? Also, how do I know which package is required when? So yeah, those are two good questions. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Starbucks file is already a CSV. I'd have to double check, but that one is, I don't think that one is a PDF itself. I know the Dunkin' Donuts one is a PDF, and that one you need to scrape. And there's gonna be a workshop later this week about how to scrape PDF files. Yeah, you'll be able to learn how to scrape that at some point later. Will this R file be shared with us after the meeting? Yeah, it'll be posted up on Linktree as well for you to mess around with as well. And then the other question you asked, how do I know which package is required when? So the thing is, you can't know. Like, if you want to use a function and it doesn't exist in the base R, you're gonna need to look it up. And that's why like Google is one of the best tools. It'll basically show you different packages you might need. But as a start, Tidyverse is a very powerful tool for specifically data analysis and the Datathon. So you'll likely be learning more about it in future workshops. Don't you think these workshops would be helpful before the Datathon? I mean, yeah, that's why we're having these workshops. So like you'll be slowly introduced to R over more over time through the week, and you can slowly improve as you work. And then by the end of the week, you'll have like enough base knowledge that you'll be able to do some basic work with the Datathon. But yeah, that's all the questions for now. I'll just finish up this last part here. But like I said, once you have the Tidyverse set up here, it has a bunch of different functions that let me just make sure the file is read again, because let me just run all of this again, because I did restart my session. Okay, so yeah, we have the Tidyverse set up here. And then, so an example of a function that the Tidyverse has that doesn't come with the base R is the summarize function. And once we run it here, it essentially gives you statistics for the data frame that you're working with. So here is growth mean. So what this shows is the growth rate for the population, like the average growth rate for the population. You can see it's around 0.02 or 2%. And then there's also the growth min function, which tells you like the lowest growing population, which is negative 0.03. So it means it shrunk by around 3% here. So like a function like this is just useful to get an overall understanding of what the data you're working with is, and just be able to figure out some more information about that. And then this is just one very nice function in Tidyverse. And then the other function that is really good is the filter function. It works just like the subset function here, but it has a lot of extra benefits beyond that, because it works better with a bunch of other Tidyverse functions. It just is able to combine them together to like get like better results overall. So this filter function, for example, it shows you it filters down the data frame to only populate or cities with a growth rate above 3% or 0.03, and then that have a population in 2023 over 15 million. So when I run that here, you can see these three cities are the only ones that have a growth rate above 3% and have that population. So it just gives you like nice information, like which countries are still, or which cities are still big and continuing to grow, at least from the past year. So yeah, I think that is all I have here for the R file. I'm gonna stop the recording for now.